Canadian divas Jyoti and Kiran Matharu had their eyes set on a luxurious lifestyle. They wanted it all: shoes, makeup, jewelry, private jets, and soon all their wishes would come true. When Kiran turned 21, she met a Nigerian businessman while working at her job. They got into a relationship, and shortly after, he introduced Jyoti to his friend. It turned out that his friend was a Nigerian petroleum tycoon and wanted to fly her and her sister out to Nigeria with him. While their relationship blossomed, the sisters had the experience of flying on a private jet to Greece, France, and finally Nigeria, where his drivers took them to a mansion. While Kiran relaxed by the pool, Jyoti was given all sorts of expensive gifts, including a $10,000 monthly check. Jyoti's boyfriend even bought her an expensive condo in Toronto. But once they had a taste for luxury, the hunger would grow, and this was only the beginning for the Matharu sisters. Jyoti and Kiran have never been the types to care about what others think of them. They were born into a middle-class Indian family who migrated to Canada. Living in Toronto, their life was overall normal. While Jyoti was romantic and passionate about literature, Kiran was level-headed and excelled in math and science. The two were inseparable and always dressed up to go to school. After high school, the sisters applied to a 2-year fashion, art, and business program while working part-time jobs, sharing clothes and a car, and working to bring their fashion brand to life. At night, they spent their time at clubs, wanting to live a life inspired by Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie. At this point, they had planned on eventually finding love, having a big Indian wedding, and settling in Toronto. Then, Jyoti met her Nigerian executive boyfriend, who swept both sisters off their feet and into Nigeria. The sisters claimed it all happened so fast that there wasn't even a moment to question if everything was real. From there, they continued going to Nigeria to meet future wealthy boyfriends. "Once they find out you have a sister, it's over," said Kiran, talking about how easy it was to find men who would lavish them with riches. Taking a look at their Instagrams, their lifestyle is the definition of luxury. Brands such as Bottega Veneta, Gucci, Prada, and many more fill their closets along with accessories. They also have pictures wearing all their expensive items in their Rolls Royce driving through the streets of Dubai. They ended up with so many things that they eventually converted their Toronto condo into a walk-in closet that resembled a high-fashion boutique. There were walls lined with over 70 pairs of designer heels and glass wardrobes filled with bags and purses. They had custom rose gold jewelry and diamond watches easily worth more than a car. And did they use their own money to buy it all? No, not at all. "The only time I go shopping is when someone gives me their credit card," said Kiran, meaning these two were essentially sugar babies documenting their lives on social media. By now, they have about 80,000 followers collectively who mostly praise them for the lifestyle they live. The similarities between them and the Kardashian-Jenner family make it no surprise that the media gave these two the nickname the Canadian Kardashians. The two sisters quickly grew accustomed to their new life. Once you live with money, it's hard to go back to a life without it. And with how things were going, they would never have to. They put their dreams of a fashion brand on hold to make time for the men willing to provide for them. They even had expectations for the men they dated. They were attracted to the power, wealthy men in Nigeria and their position on the Forbes Billionaire list. It didn't matter if these men had wives or children either. The tabloids loved the Canadian Kardashian sisters and claimed they were the most provocative women in Nigeria. But even provocative women have standards. These rich men would have to spoil them and fund their expensive tastes in life if they wanted to date them. It seemed like the perfect life for someone who wanted to be a sugar baby. It wasn't until their last trip to Nigeria that things took a turn for the worst. Both sisters woke up one morning, and after having a shower, they heard a loud knocking on their hotel room door. A group of men barged in, demanding that the two go to the police station for questioning. Confused and frightened, the sisters refused to go with them. You can still find the photos taken of them in their bathrobes online. Plainclothes police officers took these photos. Nothing was provided when the sisters asked them to provide proof of identification. Instead, the officers claimed that they would take them in their bathrobes if the two of them did not get dressed. In the end, they were forced to comply and taken to the station with the fear that they were being kidnapped. When they got to the police station, officers accused them of owning a popular gossip blog called Najasit Live. This site is known to spread scandalous rumors about Nigerian elites and accused the sisters of prostitution. Kieran and Jayoti denied being the owners, but the police did not believe them. From here, the officers drove them to another police station belonging to the anti-robbery squad. According to a 2016 Amnesty report, this station was known for its corruption and use of torture to extract confessions. When the two arrived, they claimed to be put into a dimly lit room while an officer demanded they sign a confession to owning the gossip site. Najasit Live was written in Nigerian Pidgin, a language neither girl spoke. When the girls refused to sign the confession, they were forced to a cell. 11 other girls stayed overnight. The following day, they were taken to a hotel room near the airport and guarded for 18 days. They found out they were accused of threatening to kidnap and blackmail wealthy Nigerian elites, including the politically powerful oil tycoon Femi Otedola. Femi Otedola was the controlling shareholder of Forte Oil. In Nigeria, they have over 500 gas stations as well as a gas-fired power plant. In 2015, he was number 16 on Forbes' 50 richest Africans list. He was also Kieran's ex-boyfriend. The sisters claim that Otedola was angry because they rejected his advances to rekindle their relationship. Otedola then filed a request for police to find whoever owns Najasit Live, claiming they were using nude pictures to blackmail elites. Their suspects? The Canadian Kardashian sisters. While the sisters were in detention, officers brought them to Otedola's home where, according to Jayoti and Kieran, he supposedly forced them to record a video confessing to owning the website and apologizing to him and his family. He promised that if they recorded the video, he would provide them with their passports and let them leave for Canada. After recording the video, it was uploaded to the internet and the girls were still not given their passports back. During this time, the gossip site's Twitter was posting even though the officers confiscated the sisters' electronics. The owner even eventually took down the site in order to prove that the Matharu sisters weren't the owners. After posting bail and waiting for weeks in their room, the sisters were finally allowed to travel back to Canada with emergency travel documents claiming that their bail didn't restrict travel and that their physical safety was at risk. While back in Toronto, the two sisters stayed off of social media with hopes that the whole fiasco would die down. The media exploded with unofficial facts about the sisters, being, let's just call them ladies of the night, as well as calling them gold diggers and scammers. After seeing their names get raked through the mud, they decided they'd had it. It was time to fight back and clear their names. They posted all of their evidence along with their side of the story on their lifestyle blog, Metropolitan. They contacted City News to give a 30-minute interview discussing what they went through and their feelings toward the media. They claimed that none of the news media had reached out to get their side of the story, so Jayoti and Kieran reached out to them, threatening to sue if the companies didn't print retractions. Jayoti and Kieran knew that many backlashes came from society's tendency to frown on a woman who allows herself to be single while being lavished by men. People hated them simply because they didn't like how they lived, but the sisters didn't care what the consequences were as long as they could clear their names. And just when they thought they were in the clear, Jayoti was told by Canadian customs officials that she couldn't travel to the United States due to an arrest warrant on her passport. Meanwhile, her sister Kieran was traveling to Italy to do some furniture shopping. While waiting for her luggage, Italian customs officials locked Kieran in a room without food, water, or explanation. After 8 hours, officers finally told her that she had a flag on her passport from Interpol and that she was being placed under provisional arrest. Police officials held her for 40 days, waiting to be deported to Nigeria, but the paperwork never came. Kieran was allowed to travel back to Canada. Philip Adebowale, the Nigerian police officer who initially detained the sisters, was the one who issued the warrant for their arrest. He claimed he didn't conspire with Otedola or demand bribes, as the sisters had mentioned. When asked why they didn't send the extradition paperwork for Kieran, he blamed it on the Italian police and bureaucratic errors. When Kieran returned to Canada, the two sisters pleaded with Interpol to remove their names from the red alert list so they would be allowed to travel again. Everyone knew this to be impossible without a lawyer, but the sisters felt they could accomplish it. While waiting for Interpol, the sisters decided to let their Instagrams flourish with photos of them wearing designer items. During this time, an American man who was a follower of Jayoti reached out, asking if she would like to start a fashion company. He lived in Dubai, but since the women weren't allowed to travel, he was willing to come to them. After months of waiting and fighting, Interpol sent them a package containing a letter letting them know that Interpol had deleted their names from the list. This meant they were free to travel again and had done so without a lawyer. The American man, who they have decided to keep unnamed, booked a flight for Jyoti to come to Dubai. After a stressful and sleepless flight, she was delighted that nobody was waiting to arrest her at the airport. What started as a business meeting quickly blossomed into a romance. Again, Jyoti found herself being taken care of by a wealthy man. One night, Jyoti wore an orange dress created by Kiran. This dress mesmerized the man, who encouraged them to move to Los Angeles to start their fashion career. After all the scandals, the sisters now had the ability to realize their dream of creating a fashion brand. Now, the sisters own a clothing store called Spectrum Studio, where they sell the clothes that Kiran makes. When advising others going through a public scandal, they remind people to be the one who tells the story, be transparent that nobody is perfect, and when people ask questions, answer them. They have learned from their experience and no longer mess around with Nigerian princes. In a wild turn of events, they have turned a scandalous story into a successful business, genuinely living up to the Kardashian name. Isabel Lagasse and Melina Roberge were 23 years old and both working dead-end jobs. They were drowning in debt and worked unorthodox jobs to pay it off. In a later court appearance, Isabel claimed that she had borrowed $20,000 from some bad people who threatened her and her family if she didn't pay them back. She even performed as an adult film star while Melina worked as an escort. They kept going on like this until someone offered to wipe it all away. This offer came from Melina's sugar daddy, with whom she'd had a relationship since 2015. Melina said he was a wealthy Canadian citizen, but refused to identify him for fear of her family's safety. She worked as the man's escort for a while before he eventually gave the two women an opportunity to become smugglers for him. He promised an all-expenses-paid vacation around the world, and if all went well, they'd be compensated $100,000 for their trouble. All they had to do was smuggle 95 kilograms of illegal drugs worth $21 million into Australia. No problem, right? The offer was too tempting for the women to pass up, and it wasn't hard for them to leave their 9-to-5s behind and begin a new life. These two young women would have never put together the plan without a third party pulling the strings. That third party was their accomplice, 60-year-old Andrew Tammet, also referred to as Melina's sugar daddy. There was a lot of confusion over this figure's place in the whole situation. It was proven that he was a big part of the smuggling operation as he went around with the girls. From what was reported, Melina would sleep with different individuals that Tammet introduced to her. This happened in multiple parts of the world as the small syndicate traveled around. The confusion of the whole thing comes into play when the person who initially approached the girls is considered. Some seem to believe that Tammin was the sugar daddy who found Melina in the first place. However, this doesn't make much sense since she revealed everything about Tammin and her dealings with him. Yet, she was too afraid to disclose the identity of the man she only referred to as a wealthy Canadian benefactor. Her openness about Tammin and her clear fearfulness of the unnamed man suggest that they are different people. This conclusion begs the question, who is really pulling the strings? While we can never be sure, the police believe the women and Tammin to be a small cog in a much bigger machine. This makes more sense as to why the mystery man wasn't more involved with the operation. If he really was such a valuable piece of something bigger, it stands to reason that he would stay far away from any trouble. Tickets aboard luxury cruise ships are not cheap. They typically cost around $100 to $200 a day, and that's not even including other things you'll pay for while on board, like fun frozen drinks and food. Some of these cruises last for months, so the ticket price can be overwhelming. This could be another factor that Roberge and Lagasse considered when first offered the smuggling gig. With debts and jobs like theirs, they would have never been able to afford a ride around the world on the Sea Princess cruise ship. Yet this is where the two young ladies, Tammin and a few other syndicate members, found themselves. The cruise took them everywhere from Peru to Bermuda while offering up the most luxurious amenities. The cruise ship was a non-stop party for everyone on board as it docked at 17 different ports in 11 countries. One of their main goals was to hide their drug trafficking trip behind the guise of two girls just living their best lives. They made inspirational posts to all of their social media accounts. Days before they set sail, Roberge posted a long-winded message on her Instagram about traveling with an open mind and how she was ready to take on the world. She used to fear leaving home but was ready to conquer the world. The purpose was to give the illusion that the two were just traveling abroad on a journey to discover themselves, something the Instagram community ate up like breakfast. While their primary purpose was to be beautiful decoys, they also had to hide a good chunk of the drugs in their suitcases. It still hasn't been determined exactly where they got the drugs, but it is believed that they acquired them in Peru. Their main job of creating an online presence to hide the syndicate's dirty dealings opened them up to an attack of a different sort. In the modern day and age, most things go on the internet. This new way society operates has given birth to an enemy we're all too familiar with: trolls. The trolls smelt blood in the water once the two women were caught. On one of their posts, the girls wrote, "Eat, beach, sleep, repeat," to which a hilarious commenter responded, "Eat, beach, yard time, repeat, #prison." In the small syndicate's minds, they were being incredibly clever. They believed that their plan to hide behind the women's social media accounts went off without a hitch. Little did they know that U.S. and Canadian authorities labeled the women as high-risk travelers before they ever stepped foot on the Sea Princess. However, why officers felt that way remains a mystery and is most likely part of an active and ongoing investigation. It's safe to assume that any cruise ship that stops at any of the hot spots for drugs around the world gets at least a glance. It seems like the scheme had no chance of succeeding from the very beginning and ultimately collapsed when they docked in Australia. Everyone was surprised when the authorities and their drug dogs boarded the ship and walked straight to their cabin. Once brought on board, it didn't take long for the animals to sniff out the massive amount of illegal drugs. All of the drugs were located in members of the syndicate's suitcases, making it really hard to deny. With all the different ports that cruise ships stopped at, it's rather apparent that they could have unloaded their haul in a few different places. So why Australia? What about the land down under made them want to bring the drugs there instead of, let's say, Portugal or Europe? The answer is simple and as old as time. They would make the most money in Australia. The Aussies have set up some very strict drug laws that could land violators in prison for the rest of their lives. This extra bit of danger shows how much more the drugs they carried were worth in Australia than in other countries. On average, the drugs are worth around 3 times as much as they would be in Canada or America. While you would imagine that the harsher laws would deter people from smuggling, it actually had the inverse effect. It made Australia one of the most desirable locations to send drug shipments for any ambitious cartel. If they could manage to get their product past customs and onto the Australian streets, they would stand to make a whole lot of money. This is more than likely one of the biggest reasons why the syndicate sent $21 million worth of drugs with the women and their associates. The entire gang was arrested after authorities seized the drugs. Until this point, the two women operated very similarly to one another. They both posed and took pictures while pretending they weren't smuggling drugs. Roberge even stated that she was encouraged to take pictures of myself in exotic locations and then post them on Instagram to receive likes. However, during their court appearances, they went in completely different directions. Lagasse admitted her guilt and told the court that she took the job to settle her insurmountable debt. The early guilty plea granted her a little leniency and allowed her to begin her sentence immediately. Even though she wasn't sentenced until a little later, she got time served for her incarceration before then. On the other hand, Roberge maintained her innocence, claiming that she never knew the drugs were in the suitcases. However, nobody believed her. The prosecution believed it was highly unlikely that someone other than the two girls hid the drugs under the bed. Furthermore, how do you share a small cabin with someone and not know they're smuggling $21 million worth of drugs in your suitcase? Roberge's blatant lies ended up costing her valuable time. In the face of insurmountable evidence, she had to admit her guilt anyway. While their trip was filled with carefree energy, the weight of what they both had done hit the young women in court. They both were seen dabbing tears from their eyes during the trial. Lagasse and Roberge were not only brought into the fold with money, but the promise of a glamorous lifestyle. They admitted as such in court, and the judge was none too pleased with them or their generation. Judge Kate Trail, who oversaw the case, wasn't the biggest fan of social media. She believed the lure of social media attention seduced the girls, and they chose this life of crime to earn likes on Instagram. These two girls wanted others to envy them, but few probably do now. Roberge later admitted that she was a stupid young woman motivated by superficial goals. Sending criminals back to their country of origin after serving their time is a pretty regular occurrence. It's kind of like if some kid stole from your house. After punishing them, you wouldn't want them to hang around your home, now would you? This was Lagasse's fate when she was released from Australian prison in February 2021. She was sent back to Canada and has been pretty quiet since then. No more pictures from Peru or inspirational quotes posted on her Instagram. She seemed to have gotten enough of the glamorous side of life to last her forever. On the other hand, Roberge got herself a slightly longer sentence for lying in the court. She got out in May of 2021. However, similarly to Legacy, she must have had enough of being in the spotlight. Both girls seemingly disappeared into the Canadian ether. Hopefully, their sugar daddy forgave them because their creditors certainly didn't. 31-year-old Sarah Jane Kavanaugh wanted people to believe she was a decorated war hero. She created fake accounts and crafted an elaborate backstory about how she was a brave Marine who contracted cancer from exposure to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. She used this narrative to convince generous folks to send her money for her supposed healthcare expenses. The only problem is that it was all based on a lie. Brave men and women in the U.S. military are granted honors and medals to commemorate their courage or sacrifice on the battlefield. According to Kavanaugh, she received two of the most prestigious medals given to service members, the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. The Purple Heart is the military's oldest honor, reserved for only the worthiest recipients. It's granted to individuals who were either wounded or killed during active duty, symbolizing the sacrifice of servicemen and women. It was first established in 1782, and more than 2 million have been distributed in the 240 years since. The Bronze Star was first established in 1944. This medal is given to individuals who demonstrated heroism during a military operation against enemy forces. The V displayed by those who wear the Bronze Star stands for valor, which all recipients are deemed to possess. Of course, not everyone who claims to have received these medals demonstrates such honorable qualities. That brings us back to Kavanaugh. As part of her effort to fleece well-meaning individuals, Kavanaugh claimed that she developed stage 4 lung cancer after inhaling chemicals emitted by burn pits during her service in the Middle East. Many veterans, particularly those who served during the Afghanistan war, have suffered severe health consequences from such burn pits. They were initially set up on bases across the region to dispose of various materials. While fire can be an effective way to get rid of the trash, it also produces smoke and fumes detrimental to the health of those nearby. As a result of those burn pits, the military estimates that 3.5 million American service members were exposed to potentially harmful emissions. Kavanaugh was not one of those people, but that didn't stop her from claiming that she was. According to prosecutors, she scammed generous supporters and advocacy groups out of about $250,000. Authorities say she petitioned several leading military organizations, including the Code of Support Foundation, for donations to her cause. That group provided her with roughly $18,000, which she used to repair the furnace in her home and pay for a membership at a health club, among other things. She reportedly brought in more than $200,000 from the Wounded Warrior Project, which collected the funds to help her with her grocery bills and the cost of physical therapy. Creative Vets, a group dedicated to providing art therapy to veterans, spent more than $16,000 on Kavanaugh's behalf. A source from within the organization said the benefits included tuition and travel, among other expenses. Her online fundraiser netted an additional $4,700 in donations. As one of those donors later acknowledged, Kavanaugh's story was so convincing that it couldn't be a lie. It was impossible. Kate Mannion hosted a military-themed podcast and used her position to call on others to donate money. In a subsequent article, Mannion wrote that she was so wrapped up in the story that she suspended disbelief and did not research the claims. Upon closer inspection, however, she noted that Kavanaugh wore her medals differently than actual Marines would. However, when faced with the prospect of helping a dying veteran, the host said that she didn't even look closely at any of that stuff because she never imagined that anyone would make up such a story just to make a few bucks. Marine Major Thomas Schumann, who started the veterans group Patrol Base Abate, said Kavanaugh reached out to him and presented fake documents to back up her cancer claims. He met with her to discuss her situation and confirmed that she had created a fundraising account and repeated the same claims about her military history and illness. She recounted the supposed injuries she received in Afghanistan and lengthy recovery at medical facilities in Germany and the United States. She even told Schumann she had 2 years left to live. To maintain a lie like this one, Kavanaugh had to provide some evidence to back up her claims. She used her job at the Veterans Administration and her knack for weaving complicated lies to accomplish her shady goal. She was working at a VA medical center in Rhode Island when she got her hands on a discharge certificate for a Marine named Patrick Herney. Prosecutors say she forged that document to say she served in the Marines between 2009 and 2016. She altered the paperwork to indicate that she achieved the rank of corporal. She also replaced Hernie's birthday and social security number with her own. Certain other identifying information, including a military ID number, were left untouched. As for the medals, Kavanaugh bought them from a military supplier in California. She put on a convincing act, including a speech she delivered in August 2021 at the Purple Heart Trail in her home state. Clad in a uniform adorned by the Purple Heart Medal, she reflected on living life in a war zone. Addressing a crowd of veterans, she recited a poem she wrote about those who are unsure of how to exist in the world after leaving the military. Insisting that she could relate to that sentiment, she described herself as one of those veterans who wished to fly under the radar, who merely did what was asked when it was asked. After sharing her poem, Kavanaugh went on to share her supposed motivation. She described a fellow Marine who was injured during their service in Afghanistan. Upon being discharged and returning to the United States, she claimed that the individual took their own life. She also referenced the 11 other Marines who received a Purple Heart along with her, adding that some came home, some did not, but no one came home the same. As with any complex scheme, Kavanaugh's house of cards came toppling down. In early 2022, authorities looked into claims that she was falsifying information to perpetuate a scam. In addition to forging military documents, prosecutors say she also created fraudulent medical paperwork to reflect her fake lung cancer. Reports indicate that she even reached out to a veterans health advocacy group for assistance. However, staff at the Hunter 7 Foundation reached a dead end when they tried to verify Kavanaugh's Marine background. As the allegations against her piled up, she caved under pressure to resign as the commander of the Veterans of Foreign Wars in Rhode Island. At that point, her problems were only getting worse. A criminal complaint laid out the case against Kavanaugh, revealing a complex scheme meant to deceive and defraud organizations committed to helping actual veterans dealing with a range of serious issues. Prosecutors say she leveraged her ties to the VA to obtain a uniform and the prestigious medals. She was also accused of retrieving the documents necessary to forge evidence that she was being treated for lung cancer at the Dana-Farber Institute in Boston. After using an actual patient's identification and records, she allegedly submitted the documentation to Hunter 7 and claimed that she needed help paying her bills while battling the potentially deadly disease. A Marine who served around the same time as Kavanaugh brought the matter to the attention of the Hunter 7 Foundation. She would have known about Kavanaugh if she was as decorated as she claims. The administrators and members of a Facebook group dedicated to female Marines investigated the authenticity of the documents. Several people determined there was something fishy going on with the information. When officials got suspicious, they looked more closely at Kavanaugh's documentation, particularly the military ID number. Their research revealed the ID linked back to Herney, the actual Marine who served between 2011 and 2016 before taking on a civilian role with the Navy. He was able to add more context to the investigation by confirming that he had been treated at the VA hospital while Kavanaugh worked there. However, he didn't know who she was nor how she got her hands on his information. Prosecutors say the ID number was left untouched, but she altered the social security number on the forged documents. One glaring issue with her papers was that a release form signed in 2015 listed her discharge date as 2016. She identified herself as a Marine security guard on the same document, though there was no evidence that she had completed the necessary training. Even as she faced increasing heat from military groups, donors, and authorities, she maintained her innocence. She even agreed to an interview with the military news outlet Task and Purpose, during which she asserted that she didn't tell the Hunter 7 Foundation that she was a Marine veteran dying of cancer. Furthermore, she claimed that the organization contacted her initially, and she didn't send representatives any documentation painting her as an injured veteran. She says they wanted to know her story. She described the interactions as indirect, third-person referrals, and claimed that she had no idea the group planned to conduct a fundraiser to benefit her. As for the money collected on her behalf, Kavanaugh insisted that she wouldn't claim any donations from any charities. Attempting to distance herself from the allegations, she denied having any ties to the VFW in Rhode Island. She also evaded questions about whether she'd been installed as the commander of that post. VFW officials acknowledged that she'd been the post's commander before her resignation amid the growing scandal. Issuing public denials and stepping down from her post wasn't enough to keep prosecutors from pursuing her. U.S. Attorney Zachary A. Kuna said Kavanaugh's fraud was $241,000, which came from various organizations and individual contributors who found her GoFundMe page. The Hunter 7 Foundation confirmed that it had refunded any donations given to Kavanaugh. According to the group's executive director, the entire ordeal cost them more than just money. Chelsea Simone explained that Kavanaugh presented a heart-wrenching story that hijacked compassion. Everyone fell for her lies and gave her resources that could have gone somewhere else. As of the latest updates available, there's no reliable information confirming that she never enlisted in the Marines or any other military branch. She was arrested on suspicion of multiple crimes, including forging a military discharge, fraud, and aggravated identity theft. If convicted, she could spend 25 years behind bars. Following her arrest, she was released after posting a $50,000 bond. Several prominent cases of stolen valor or fraudulently portraying oneself as a military hero have made the news in recent years. When combined with a fake illness and an effort to fleece well-meaning people out of their money, Kavanaugh's case is even more outrageous than most. Seeing how she faces more than 2 decades in prison, it's clear that prosecutors and military officials treat crimes like hers very seriously. In 2008, 50 federal law enforcement officers gathered at a 6th-floor Manhattan Upper West Side townhouse. The agents stood in the rain outside the Beaux Arts townhouse, the home of self-proclaimed businesswoman, film producer, and philanthropist Dinah Wine Reese. The FBI agents came armed with a search warrant and entered the home's 1st floor. The entranceway was adorned with expensive art and ornate French furniture. They walked further into the home, where large rooms were fabulously decorated with treasures, stained glass doors, and canvases from some of the world's most famous artists, including Andy Warhol, Frank Stella, and Thomas Hart Benton. The search warrant allowed the FBI to seize anything and everything of value in Wine Reese's home, which was likely obtained through fraud. They gathered necklaces, watches, a pair of Louis XVI's footstools, 2 Bugatti throne chairs, a couple of Empire sleigh beds, and a 1920s cast iron vanity. They called in 2 big moving vans to take the treasures out of the home. They didn't finish digging until 3 a.m. They were overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of gold and diamond jewels, renowned art, and rare artifacts. One FBI agent compared Wine Reese's luxury townhouse to King Tut's tomb. Wine Reese was arrested at the scene on charges of conspiracy and wire fraud. After a brief fainting scene, she was escorted out of her own home by FBI agents to a local hospital. Then she was arraigned, fingerprinted, photographed, and sent to federal jail. 5 associates were also arrested and charged for their roles in the fraud ring. Wine Reese grew up the youngest of 3 kids in Borough Park, Brooklyn. Her father, Solomon Wine, was a clothing manufacturer. By her early 20s, Wine Reese caught the eye of David Ruiz, a Colombian man from a working-class immigrant family. The two quickly fell in love and married. He converted to Judaism and changed his last name to Reese. They had 3 sons together. Wine Reese set out to build a fortune that differed vastly from her modest Brooklyn upbringing. Wine Reese, and the people she surrounded herself with, wore designer clothes, never repeated outfits, and were in tip-top physical shape. They always wore the most expensive makeup and accessories. They worked to inflate the egos of their corporate targets and used reverse psychology to ambush any form of critical thinking or suspicion that could have gotten them in trouble. In a meeting with Wine Reese in 2006, Robert Gregerson, the president of Polaroid's instant camera division, basically begged Wine Reese to spend time with him and get involved in the Polaroid camera campaign. Wine Reese was known for the luxurious life she led. She had 6 expensive homes in New York, New Jersey, and Florida, all of them filled with designer furniture and one-of-a-kind artwork worth more than $35 million. In a life probably lacking in emotional connection, she filled the void with pricey status items. Her fortune was estimated at $100 million before the 2008 recession, which decreased the value of real estate and valuable art. This was also before her employees tipped off the authorities about Wine Reese's fortune and facade. One employee said that Wine Reese went through assistance like toilet paper. This employee was, of course, fired. Wine Reese's behavior went from sweet to angry in an instant. When one employee wanted to take off Thursday and Friday to attend her grandfather's funeral, Wine Reese called her the following Monday to fire her. Wine Reese didn't have any boundaries regarding what her personal assistants could and could not do. She even called one of her employees to put a pair of dirty underwear in the laundry basket. The last straw was when Wine Reese fired an assistant for breaking her foot. The assistant turned her in, and then it all came crashing down. Product diversion, otherwise known as the gray market, is when items are sold when and where they aren't supposed to be distributed. For example, if you get free merchandise from a company giveaway, you're not supposed to turn around and sell it for a profit. It's trendy in the industries of arcade games, cars, cell phones, computer games, electronics, frequent flyer miles, infant formula, pharmaceuticals, textbooks, sneakers, and more. People have made careers out of product diversion and amassed incredible fortunes. Wine Reese was a gray market extraordinaire. By the early 1990s, Wine Reese was a hustling businesswoman approaching well-known brands and asking them to sell her products at an almost offensively discounted price. It didn't take long for companies to grow suspicious of her. In 1995, Hershey Foods, Golden Grain Quaker Oats, and Warner Lambert all filed lawsuits against her. At least 5 more lawsuits were filed against her by Beechnut, Hanover Foods, 8 O'Clock Coffee, Unilever, and more, accusing Wine Reese of fraud, diversion, and racketeering. One lawsuit claimed she scammed 54 companies in 18 states. But this wasn't enough to stop her business empire. She went on to scam many more companies out of massive fortunes. Wine Reese is the criminal mastermind behind a scam that defrauded millions from some of the most powerful, wealthy corporations in America. First, she and her employees called company executives to offer them a lucrative opportunity to sell their products in local niche markets. If the people liked the products, she promised to sell the products at a premium in her exclusive network of 6,500 retailers. To initiate the process, she asked executives to send a shipment of merchandise as she promised them access to her national distribution program, which didn't even exist. She and her partners claimed she owned and controlled priceless business ventures that could distribute, promote, and vastly increase the sales of the business's products. Turns out, these so-called invaluable business ventures she owned and controlled were just shell companies that Wine Reese incorporated to lend credence to her scheme. Wine Reese sold free or discounted merchandise at high prices to unknowing customers for personal financial gain, defrauding corporations out of tens of millions of dollars. She often sweetened the deal by treating her corporate connections to first-class airline tickets, luxury hotels, limousines, and Broadway tickets. The final step was to invite them to one of her homes where she would impress them with a butler, huge staff, and rare artwork. Then she offered high-paying positions in her empire. But there was no job. It was all a farce. She got away with it for a long time. She was a savvy businesswoman and surrounded herself with fellow schemers who continually advised her. Wine Reese went by several aliases and even changed the nameplates outside her New York Midtown office between appointments with corporate execs. One ex-employee said it sometimes got confusing to keep up with the constant identity changes, but somehow Wine Reese's excellent theatrics pulled it off. She ran this multi-million-dollar crime ring for 15 years before getting caught. Though product diversion isn't illegal per se, Wine Reese's method of acquiring this merchandise definitely was. She lied to companies and claimed that she was handing out the items for free in lucrative markets, but she was selling them at a profit. Not to mention the so-called market she touted didn't even exist. You won't be surprised to learn that once the companies sent Wine Reese their merchandise, they never heard from her again. It was a fraud, plain and simple, and that's what got her in trouble. The companies that gave Wine Reese their free or discounted merchandise for distribution in her national distribution program were mainly pharmacies, grocery stores, salons, and hardware stores, all members of the Fortune 500. Instead of boosting the victim corporation's profits by giving out free samples to nursing homes, schools, ethnic organizations, and charities like she promised, she sold all of it for personal gain. Then, she used the funds to afford a lavish lifestyle. Wine Reese's targets included nearly 500 companies over the years, including Revlon, Pfizer, Campbell's Soup, Colgate-Palmolive, Eastman Kodak, Jergens, Kellogg's, Heinz, and Kraft. Some of her largest profits came from Terre Haute, Clabber Girl, and Roche Diagnostics. Most of these companies are based in Indiana. Roche sold diabetes care products at incredibly discounted prices for 85% to a firm allegedly owned by Wine Reese. Roche's lawsuit states that the firm paid $1.7 million of $12 million worth of merchandise in 2006. Another one of her so-called firms offered to sell 90% of the goods to Walgreens for a meager $4.6 million, which made Walgreens suspicious and caused them to alert Roche of the shady deal. Roche's lawsuit cited $10 million in losses, but it was settled confidentially and out of court. A spokeswoman for the company was forbidden from talking about it. While Wine Reese says her scam operated for 8 years, Roche claims that it began much earlier in the 1990s. In 2008, after her arrest at her 6-story New York townhouse, Wine-Reese was released on bail against prosecutors' wishes. She was placed on house arrest at her sprawling $30 million mansion on Riverside Drive. The 44-year-old scamming mother started volunteering at a non-profit organization to show the criminal justice system that she'd turned over a new leaf. The non-profit organization helps former prison inmates rebuild their lives with a focus on aging parents and children. She was now using all that passion for making money and defrauding companies to help her community. Allegedly, in 2011, Wine-Reese pleaded guilty to a federal charge of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in a deal with prosecutors. She faced 5 years in prison, but this shrank her sentence to 31 months. Sentencing was delayed while Wine-Reese sold the priceless possession she amassed through her corporate fraud scheme. When Reese took the stand, she delivered an emotional plea saying that she'd changed a lot since 2008, citing the nonprofit organization where she now volunteered. A childhood friend, Suri Drucker, wrote a letter begging the court for Wine-Reese to be released on bail, but it wasn't enough to keep her out of prison. In April 2013, U.S. District Judge sentenced her to 10 months behind bars in connection to the scam that stole billions from corporations. The judge also ordered her to pay her victims $7 million in restitution, quite a small amount considering the fortune she amassed. According to First Assistant U.S. Attorney General John Minkler, this $7 million was the largest white-collar criminal fraud judgment in the history of the Southern District of Indiana. Wine-Reese was able to pay the $7 million restitution in addition to a fine and forfeited her vast treasure trove of valuables. Minkler said he hoped that this would help recover the financial damages to the victim companies and also discourage anyone else trying to engage in similar types of scams, especially at the expense of Indiana businesses. Wine-Reese remained free while waiting for placement at an area prison. Her attorney, J. Richard Kiefer, suggested she serve time at the Federal Correctional Institution for low-risk female offenders in Danbury, Connecticut, about 70 miles from New York City. Kiefer also asked that her devotion to nonprofit should be a reason to let her off with only probation. The judge disagreed, arguing that it would send the wrong message to potential offenders, who would see that they could execute a scam, live in the lap of luxury for nearly 2 decades, and then just get a slap on the wrist. When Wine-Reese has since been released from prison and put her 8-bedroom mansion on the market for a whopping $65 million. The home was built in the late 19th century by renowned architect C.P.H. Gilbert. The 70-story mansion has views of the Hudson River, more than 70 windows, an entertaining floor complete with a chef's kitchen, and a glass observatory with 180-degree views. The terrace is big enough to seat 100 people. By New York City standards, where people live in studio apartments the size of a closet, this isn't just a mansion but a castle. The garden houses pear trees and exotic plants. There's a staff quarters with a kitchen, a bathroom, and a separate entrance, a gym, and a wine cellar. The 4th floor is adorned with Jacobean paneling and an ornate tiered fireplace. Wine-Reese purchased the home in 1996 and leased it for $75,000 per month in 2013 while she was serving time. In 2021, she paid former federal prosecutor Brett Tolman $20,000 to lobby the Trump administration to commute her sentence. Even though she had already served her prison time, Wine-Reese was hoping that Trump could get back some of the money she was forced to pay in restitution and fines. Unfortunately, things didn't go so well on that front, and she was forced to officially list her beloved New York City mansion on the market in 2022. Here are a few of the craziest moms ever. Number 11, Amber Stevenson. In 2015, Amber Stevenson wanted to impart a crucial message upon her 6-year-old son, Jab Jab Punch. While the two shopped at Walmart, Amber got into what she considered a justified altercation with another woman named Rebecca Mills. Amber pinned Mills to the ground and then called to her son, Johnny, for backup. Apparently, rules about fair fights went right out the window when little Johnny started kicking Mills while she was down. He even emptied a bottle of shampoo on her for added effect. Amber took to Facebook and thanked her supporters for what she considered a learning lesson for Johnny. She didn't raise her kid to take no BS. Her words, not ours. According to Amber, the fight started when Mills allegedly used a racial slur towards a Walmart employee. However, footage of the altercation, which went viral in a heartbeat, did not back up her claim. Other reports say the fight started when Mills drove by in a motorized shopping cart, and Amber, wearing a YOLO shirt, felt the urge to speak up. Apparently, she didn't think Mills needed to be in a wheelchair. Police looked into both women and eventually charged Amber with several offenses. She pled guilty to neglecting a dependent, but charges for contributing to the delinquency of a minor and disorderly conduct were dropped. A judge slapped Amber with a 1-year probation and 30 hours of court-ordered community service. As for Johnny, there might be a black belt in his future. Number 10. Casey Garcia. Casey Garcia thought security at her daughter's school wasn't tight enough. So one day, she hopped out of bed and decided it was time to take action. She dressed up as her 13-year-old daughter. She dyed her hair, threw on some skin tanner, and transformed into her teenage daughter. Then, she was off to school. Once Casey showed up posing as her daughter, she walked to the front door without anyone batting an eye. She attended all her daughter's classes and even got lunch with the other students. She thought security could do a better job, and it looks like she proved her point. Finally, Casey revealed who she was to a teacher who was in total shock at the end of the day. Casey referred to the stunt as a social experiment, a clear demonstration that the school needs to improve its security. Police eventually arrested Casey at her home, charging her with trespassing and forging government records. Casey, however, stuck to her guns. She explained why she posed as her daughter in a lengthy YouTube video. She was surprised by how easy it was since the children had to wear face masks during class. The only thing teachers reprimanded her for was having her phone out during class. And Casey Garcia wasn't the only lady who posed as her daughter. We'll get to that mom a bit later. Number 9. Kimberly Quach. Kim Quach thought it was wise to sell drugs to students at Cathedral Catholic High School in San Diego, where her son was a student. She even had a partner helping her with transactions named William Sipperly III, her live-in companion. Together, the two of them used minors to transport marijuana into the school. According to police, she had about 70 underage clients between her son's school and other schools in the area. She also had a network of kids moving drugs through the halls. Quach grew her product at home, which police found after arresting her in 2017. They found plant food, grow lights, and other paraphernalia that she needed to grow weed. Caught red-handed, she pled guilty, and a judge sentenced her to almost 12 years in prison. Her sidekick Sipperly also pled guilty and faced between 6 and 10 years in prison. His charges stemmed from supplying drugs to a minor over 14 years old. Apparently, the students at Cathedral Catholic were heavy smokers. Did Quach's operation turn them into regular stoners, or did she stumble upon a profitable market? Number 8. Dee Dee Blanchard. Gypsy Rose Blanchard had a crazy mother named Dee Dee Blanchard. The mother, who experts say had a case of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, basically treated her daughter like she had every illness under the sun. Ever since Gypsy was born, Dee Dee faked the girl's conditions to amuse her own mental illness. As Gypsy grew, her conditions did not improve. Her darling even had people believe that Gypsy used a motorized wheelchair because of her illnesses. People questioned whether Gypsy really needed a wheelchair. Her mother moved them to another state. Once settled in Missouri, Dee Dee continued her old ways by convincing everyone Gypsy was sick 24/7. It was one illness after the other. Gypsy became more rebellious towards Dee Dee as she got older and wanted to walk again. So, Gypsy concocted a reasonably easy plan to deal with her mother once and for all. Gypsy started talking to Nicholas Gojon on a Christian dating site. The two of them hit it off, and Gypsy decided to take their relationship up a notch by asking Nicholas to take her mother out. You know, like James Bond. She explained how poorly her mother treated her, and she thought Nicholas could be her ticket to end all that. In 2015, he went to Dee Dee's home while Gypsy was there and fulfilled Gypsy's wishes. Eventually, Gypsy and Nicholas were arrested in Wisconsin. Now, Gypsy is serving a 10-year sentence and is eligible for parole in 2024. On the other hand, Nicholas was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Number 7. Victoria Hidalgo. It was Thanksgiving night. Victoria Hidalgo thought it was a good idea to fire off a weapon in her home. For no apparent reason, she fired a round into her front door. The worst detail was the infant baby left alone in the crib. After the shooting, Victoria thought it would be an excellent time to head down to an Irish pub called the Paddy Wagon, where she could have a few cold ones. She decided to call her sister at the bar to tell her what had just happened at home. Eventually, her sister stopped by the house, where she discovered the bullet hole in the front door and Victoria's baby inside. She called their mother, who then notified police. Hidalgo's 2-year-old son suffered from several medical conditions. Fresh off brain surgery, the young boy could not walk on his own. The investigation led them to Victoria, who was being driven around by a guy she'd met at the bar. He told police he was concerned for her safety and offered to drive her home. When the police saw Victoria, her eyes were bloodshot. She was slurring her speech. The shooting at her house with her baby inside was not a concern anymore. Victoria was arrested and released on bond after police charged her with child neglect. Her baby was handed over to a family member as police continued the investigation. Number 6. Jill Easter. Jill Easter felt she could change her name to Ava Everhart, and you're probably wondering why. Well, that's because Jill decided to commit a crime, and she got busted, so she thought it would be best to change her identity after becoming a convict. She, Jill, or Ava, whichever you prefer, apparently had a disagreement with the PTA president Kelly Peters of her child's school. She felt that Peters had made a wisecrack at her son's expense when she referred to him as being slow. This remark set Jill off, and she threw a tantrum like any mature adult. The woman flipped out and started accusing Peters of being mean to her son. She supposedly made anti-Peters flyers and started handing them out at school. She even said that Peters was threatening to hurt her family. Then one day, Jill and her husband Kent took their resentment towards Peters to another level. The two of them thought it would be a great idea to plant drugs in Peters' car and then call the cops on her. Well, the plan backfired because the cops showed up at the school and were soon hot on Jill's trail. Eventually, she and her husband got busted when the cops used cell phone data to put the two of them at Peters' house the night before planting the drugs. The two of them wound up getting divorced, and they both served several months in jail on top of owing Peters $5.7 million for compensatory damages. For the full story on Jill and Kent Easters, aka the couple from hell, be sure to check out this video. Number 5. Sarah Beam. Sarah Beam took the whole social distancing thing a little too far when her son tested positive for COVID. Beam, a teacher in Houston, Texas, stuck her son in the trunk of the car and brought him to get a COVID test. She drove him to a nearby testing site where she wanted her son to receive additional testing. When they arrived at the testing site, an employee approached the vehicle. Sarah explained that she wanted additional testing done on her son, who was already positive with COVID. Since the employee didn't see her son in the car, they asked where he was. Sarah, the loving mother that she is, told the workers he's in the trunk. Her reasoning for stuffing her son in the trunk of the car? She didn't want to get COVID. No, Beam wasn't driving a hatchback, at least not the way the police describe it. She stuck her son in the trunk of a sedan. Those trunks are made to crumble in the event of a crash, not to mention lack of seatbelts. After checking the trunk, the employee discovered Beam's son was okay. The employee then contacted the local authorities and made them aware of the situation. Since then, Sarah has been placed on administrative leave. However, no charges have been filed against her at this time. Number 4. Miss Caranda. After baking a batch of brownies, Michael Caranda laid them out on the stove to cool off. Proud of his accomplishment, he left the room and went to bed to dream about how good those brownies would taste. That's when things went south for Caranda. When he woke up, he discovered the whole pan of brownies was missing. His elderly mother decided to take the brownies to a senior community center to share with her friends on card night. However, his mom didn't know one tiny detail about these brownies. They were loaded with marijuana. So the senior citizens got a healthy dose of THC. Instead of playing cards, they were probably having conversations with them. The staff at the community center noticed the patients acting unusual, so they alerted the cops. It didn't take long for police to connect the dots, realizing the pot brownies made the patients full of life. Caranda's mother handed over the remaining brownies, but the police weren't done. They paid a visit to his home, slapped the cuffs on. See, marijuana isn't legal in South Dakota. Caranda just got back from Colorado, where he bought a pound of THC butter. He used half in the brownie batch and saved the other. Police released him on a $3,000 bond. Thankfully, nobody was harmed after eating the brownies, possibly just reminded of the good old days. Number 3. Aaron Garcia. Aaron Garcia's 8-year-old daughter knows just how dangerous drinking and driving can be. Aaron was about to leave her mother's house after a long night of drinking when her daughter tried to stop her. She grabbed onto the passenger side door to get in the car. But instead of listening to her daughter's pleas, Aaron backed out of the driveway, carrying her daughter almost 300 feet. A bystander saw what was happening and ran to the young girl's rescue. Garcia dragged him a short distance too. The bystander and the young girl finally got free of the car while Aaron took off down the street. They were taken to the hospital and treated for minor injuries. On the other hand, Aaron returned to her mother's house while still under the influence, with the entire neighborhood looking for her. She decided to hide in the bushes. When police arrived at the grandmother's house, they found Aaron pretty quickly as she didn't pick the perfect bush. First, she resisted arrest, but finally relaxed and was taken into custody. Police hit her with various charges, ranging from assault with a deadly weapon to child endangerment. Number 2. Laura O'Gillespie. Laura Gillespie must have been really jealous of her daughter. The middle-aged Missouri mom stole her daughter, Lauren's, identity to have all sorts of fun being 22 years old again. She enrolled in college, took out loans, and even got a driver's license in her daughter's name. She embezzled $25,000 worth of loans with her new identity and got plenty of young men to fall for her ruse. However, the actual victims at the heart of her con were Avery and Wendy Parker. They'd taken her in from a local women's shelter and believed they were helping a young woman in need. They treated Oglesby like a daughter, having no idea how ironic their sentiment truly was. Red flags popped up for the Parkers, but investigators were already hot on Oglesby's trail. They pulled her over during a routine traffic stop and forced her to come clean. The fake 22-year-old was working at a local library when she was arrested. She faced up to 5 years in prison, along with making restitution payments on the loan she took out in her daughter's name. But how did her daughter not know what was going on? The two had grown estranged, and Laura moved to West Plains, Missouri, 2 hours north. With all of her daughter's personal information on hand, obtaining the proper paperwork wasn't hard. Ogilvy's actions completely caught the university off guard. It's also unclear whether or not she ever attended any classes. They cooperated fully with the investigation and are also expecting restitution payments. As for the Parkers, they can't help but feel ill will for the 45-year-old woman who lied to them. However, they feel sorry for the 22-year-old they thought they were helping. Number 1. Lynn Savage. Lynn Savage refused to leave her daughter's bedside as she recovered from brain surgery in a hospital. From sunup to sundown, Lynn remained with her daughter for as long as she could until the hospital staff notified her that visiting hours ended at 7 p.m. given COVID rules. That's when Lynn put up a fight and refused to leave her daughter. The staff asked security to remove her from the hospital, but she wouldn't budge. Eventually, the police had to be called, and they wound up cuffing Lynn and taking her to jail. She spent a day behind bars, but stood by her actions, saying she would do it all over again for her daughter. Yep, what a savage. As 2018 concluded, Caroline Calloway was advertising an event she billed as a creativity seminar. She already built a reputation as a social media influencer, and many of her followers were excited for the opportunity to learn from her. Tickets for the 4-hour conference were a whopping $165, but that wasn't enough to deter her ardent supporters from reserving a spot. After all, the cost of admission did include a salad and assorted keepsakes like branded stickers and a notebook. When dozens of women attended the seminar in Brooklyn, New York, however, many of them noted that the event did not meet the expectations she set. The situation quickly led to allegations of fraud against the Instagram celebrity. Writer Kaylee Donaldson dedicated a long Twitter thread to warning individuals against falling for what she described as a scam. Even comedic actor Seth Rogen joined in on the backlash. A number of critics dubbed the event Firefest 2, a reference to the famously fraudulent concert that made news the previous year. Calloway tried to chalk the entire ordeal up to a lack of preparation on her part and expressed hope that she and Rogan could one day laugh about the fact that he called her a scammer. Not just anybody can expect folks to spend $165 on a seminar ticket, but Calloway already had a deep well of supporters to draw from. As a student at England's Cambridge University, she made a name for herself on Instagram. Although her inspirational and aspirational posts might have seemed to gain an organic following, she reportedly spent money to run ads and purchase followers so that her audience would grow rapidly. She also recruited Natalie Beach, a former classmate at New York University, to help her produce content for her growing Instagram account. The two women worked closely on the project before a rift in their friendship caused them to publicly disparage each other. In her ongoing effort to chase fame wherever she could, Calloway tried to secure a lucrative book deal. She even walked into the office of literary giant Bird Leavell and misrepresented herself as a client to get past his secretary. Despite starting the professional relationship out on a lie, she charmed her way into a lucrative book deal. She received an advance payment of $100,000 and would have added another $400,000 upon completion of the book. Of course, the book never saw the light of day, and Calloway was forced to return the six-figure advance. She had once again called on Beach to ghostwrite the book, but it wasn't long before their friendship went south. Instead of penning the contents to a book worth $500,000, Beach chose to expose Calloway in a scathing tell-all essay about her one-time business partner. Calloway's plan to get rich by putting her name on a book written by someone else did not work. But a short time after that deal fell through, she began pursuing another scheme. Her social media accounts were filled with details about a seminar supposedly designed to help her fans develop their own personal creativity. Many of those who paid for tickets, however, said that the so-called workshops were nothing like the programs she advertised. In a lengthy thread on Twitter, Donaldson dug deep into the details to compile evidence that she said proved the entire program was just a scam. For starters, Calloway was openly looking for photographers who would be willing to provide their services for free. Amid mounting pressure to actually pay people for their hard work, she reluctantly said that she would pay for a professional photographer. As Donaldson pointed out, though, it seemed out of touch for Calloway to complain about paying for this service while she was also bragging about spending $300 at a hair salon. From there, Calloway's social media presence devolved further into a pity party. She lamented the fact that she could not fill all of the giveaways, in particular 1,200 mason jars, in her apartment prior to the launch for her seminar. Pretty soon, she started retracting some of the perks attendees were promised. For example, she informed her fans that she would not have enough time to provide handwritten letters to everyone as she had previously planned. Instead, she'd be available to speak one-on-one with each ticket holder. Then she hinted that the 2 initial workshops would be moved to an entirely different state. Calloway had recruited attendees in Boston and Philadelphia, but sent out an online survey asking if folks in those cities would be okay with traveling to New York City instead. Making matters worse, her poll didn't seem to give people an option to say no. Another update asked people to pack their own lunches instead of eating the meal that was supposed to be provided as part of the ticket price. Despite all of these setbacks, she still seemed committed to taking her seminars around the world. Donaldson provided screenshots of posts promoting a similar workshop in England. Another one was reportedly planned for Scotland, though it was apparently never approved by local officials. All of the problems Calloway encountered during the first 2 dates resulted in her decision to cancel all future workshops. Donaldson's tweets led to a massive backlash, and the Instagram influencer decided she couldn't move forward with events planned in other cities. Eventbrite, the platform where attendees could purchase tickets, confirmed that everyone who reserved a seat at future seminars had received a refund. However, that wasn't enough to convince her critics that she was just in over her head. Calloway spoke to the media and tried to downplay her failures. She said she was simply inexperienced and had no idea that planning such a massive event would be so difficult. Some of her fans were quick to give her the benefit of the doubt. At least a few of those who went to the first 2 workshops said that they did not feel ripped off. Even though they didn't receive everything they had been promised, one attendee claimed that everyone seemed to have fun. As for Eventbrite's stance, a company spokesperson said that there was no direct evidence that Calloway was trying to be a fraudster or a bad actor. Even years after the ill-fated workshops, Calloway continues working to repair her battered public image. She's been involved in fundraisers for charity organizations and remains active on social media while sitting down for interviews to share her perspective on the entire fiasco. Despite her rehabilitation efforts, however, it's clear that internet users remain interested in the details about the workshop. With well over 2 million search engine results for her name, many of the posts and articles that show up on Google are at least in part about this low point in her online career. It wasn't only the workshops that led to Calloway's downfall. Beach spoke out publicly about her role in helping to craft her former friend's Instagram persona. In fact, Calloway said she had been offered a major payday to craft her response to Beach's allegations. When the pandemic disrupted life for everyone, however, she pulled out of that deal. Instead, she sought to raise money for various organizations, including roughly $50,000 for the group Direct Relief to provide healthcare services. Not everyone saw her plan as a selfless act, though. Many skeptics believed it was just the latest in a series of scams. Some even thought she pocketed the money she raised on social media. She didn't make things any better by telling a reporter that she planned to celebrate the fundraising success by eating copious amounts of caviar like a Russian oligarch. Prior to COVID-19 shutdowns, Calloway decided to give her seminar tour one last shot. In early 2019, a series of Instagram posts highlighted her intention to find new venues for her workshops. She claimed that 95% of the people who attended the early seminars were satisfied with the experience. As for why she canceled the remaining dates, she said that it was done out of fear that people would read negative things about her on the internet and believe that they were true. After giving it some thought, Calloway said she realized that the best way to combat the criticism would be by relaunching her tour in the spring of that year. She described her critics as people who wouldn't have bought tickets to her event in the first place. Instead of focusing on those people, she claimed to be interested only in providing the best experience possible for her fans. In the end, she said it had been a learning experience for her and indicated a desire to grow and mature as she dealt with the aftermath. When the revised dates were announced, however, the new name was quite a shocker. Apparently, she tried to capitalize on the negative press she'd already received and decided to call her workshop The Scam. One reporter wanted to find out what this new 5-hour format was all about and bought a ticket. Anna Iovine wrote about her experience in a Vice article, including the warning she received from Eventbrite that the seminar could be, as its name suggested, a scam. From there, a representative for Callaway contacted Iovine to tell her that reporters were not invited to the event. A short time later, Callaway shared a post about the situation, insisting that members of the press wouldn't be allowed at the workshop and that Iovine would be receiving a refund. This only fueled Iovine's determination to shed light on the scam. She wrote that her husband bought a ticket on her behalf and she was able to attend after all. Although the space was nice, Iovine noted that no one who arrived for the 11 a.m. start time seemed to know what to expect. Some called it a meet and greet event, but Callaway didn't even show up until noon. One of the infamous influencer's friends said it was more like a networking event. As the day progressed, Iovine said attendees read poems, decorated notebooks, and heard from Callaway about the process that goes into crafting an Instagram caption. At the end, the two women posed for a photo, and Iovine left with a gift bag filled with items like a candle and a face mask. Although the reporter said she felt bad about attending under false pretenses, she noted that it had become clear to her that Callaway was trying to cash in on a facade of success that she had built for herself online. Even though she lost a few thousand followers in the process, Callaway was determined not to let the negative coverage of her workshops completely derail her ambitions as an influencer. Part of that plan, however, involved focusing more on racy content instead of the gourmet meals and high-end fashion that had previously adorned her Instagram account. She dubbed herself the Queen of Corniness. We'll let you figure out what that means. People might not have been looking to her for advice anymore, but she figured they would still tune in to check out pictures of her wearing revealing clothes or nothing at all. Callaway also formed a plan to make $80,000 in 2020 by posting such images on subscription site OnlyFans. It's unclear whether she met that goal, but there's no doubt that her public image was much different after the workshop scandal than it was before. Callaway clearly wants to live the life of the rich and famous. Although she has arguably achieved some of the fame she so desperately chased, it's pretty clear that she's not as rich as she wants people to believe. In addition to chronicling her experience at the scam, Iovine used part of her article to present evidence that Callaway has had a hard time paying her rent. Between 2017 and 2019, records show she was taken to court 4 times for non-payment in connection with her posh New York apartment. As one lawyer who saw the documents explained, Callaway could have been evicted as a result of these proceedings. Since she was served with court papers on 4 different occasions, however, it seems that her landlord was being generous by not kicking her out of the apartment. Her apparent financial problems did not end in 2019. In early 2022, Callaway confirmed that she had moved from New York to Florida. She said at the time that her intention was to live a quieter life and resume work on her memoir. Still, there's a long line of unpaid bills that followed her out of the Big Apple. A court complaint claimed that she had not paid rent for the property since 2020 and moved out with several months left in her lease. Although a couple moved into her vacated New York studio, her landlord said that the new tenants hadn't been approved and Callaway was still on the hook for the rest of her lease, totaling about $40,000. An eviction moratorium put in place during COVID-19 prevented her from being kicked out during this time, but she's still facing a hefty penalty for choosing to break her lease agreement. At this point, it's not clear where she will get the money to settle this debt. If history is any indication, she's probably working on a new scheme right now. Mise Fake portrayed herself as a successful security specialist with throwaway money. Enough money to place a $4.5 million bid on a home. However, when the show went to cash the check, the truth was revealed. The money was never processed because the money never existed. Fake wasn't who she claimed to be. Instead, she was a serial con artist. Fake was the mysterious bidder who appeared on the grand finale of season 16 of The Block. As she went against the show's alum bidder, Danny Wallace, she shocked audiences by placing a record high bid of $4.256 million. The winning couple, Jimmy and Tam, were more than eager to cash in the $1.066 million prize. But they ran into a rather large hiccup. The production team tried to cash in the check for the home that Fake purchased, but never received the payment. When they went after Fake, they discovered she was no longer living in Australia and had fled to Portugal. The production team was stumped with what to do with the sudden plot twist. In a shocking turn of events, The Block realized Fake conned them. But the question remains, How did she get away with it? To understand how Fake pulled off the scam, you should understand how The Block works. The Block is an Australian reality show competition that's been around since 2003. The original concept for the show involved 4 couples who were experienced in renovating apartments in the Sydney suburb of Bondi. The couples were given 12 weeks to renovate each of their apartments with a $40,000 budget. The finished apartments would be sold at auction, and the team who turned the most profit would win the competition. The winning prize was the profit made from the auction and an extra cash bonus of $100,000. After 2 successful seasons, the show faced a 6-year hiatus before coming back in 2010. From there, the show went off the charts. After becoming a huge success, the show started to air multiple times a week. By July 2019, the 16th season was in development. Channel 9 and the production team of The Block purchased a vacant strip of land in the exclusive Bayside suburb of Brighton. With a new desirable location, a new round of competitors were scouted from August 2019 to September 2019. The season started to film in January 2020. Production came to a screeching halt in March after the coronavirus pandemic swept the globe. The show picked up filming again a month later in May 2020, but with a new world came a new set of guidelines to follow. Executive producer Julian Kress said The Block has implemented new safety standards across the entire production. Now focused primarily on COVID concerns, the show is vulnerable to people who may not appear as legitimate as they claim. People like Amice Fake. As season 16 ended, the houses went up for the usual auction and the bidding commenced. Everything was panning out as expected. Competitors Sarah and George saw high bids ranging from $3.32 to $3.36 million until Mr. Wallace, the show's staple buyer, won the auction with his notorious bid of $4,001. For the most part, the competition was close. Daniel and Jade were also receiving bids ranging from $3.3 to $3.5 million. Competitors Harry and Tash also saw bids in the same range. It was seemingly anyone's game until Jimmy and Tam's house went up for auction. Danny Wallace is the experienced IT millionaire bidder known for throwing random dollar and cents amount to the end of multi-million-dollar bids. Usually, the audience knew what to expect whenever he was on the screen. But when Jimmy and Tam's house went up for auction, no one could have predicted a twist was on the horizon. The Hungarian-born Fake was up against Wallace. She was labeled Mysterious Blonde by host Shelley Kraft for her shy demeanor and understated appearance. Fake was a cybersecurity specialist for Apple who appeared to be quite successful with the high bids she tossed out. In a toe-to-toe battle, Fake furthered her mysterious reputation by diving into a bidding war against Wallace. He was waiting to drop his million-dollar move. After Fake bid $3.2 million, Wallace raised his bid to $4,201,001. The $1 million jump up didn't spook Fake. Instead, she immediately countered his bid as the increments raised by $1,000 to $13,000. Rather than being fazed by the strange bids, Fake added to her air of mystery by snickering and chuckling at Wallace's bids before raising the bar. By the end of the auction, Fake was the victor. The house was sold to her for $4.256 million. Jimmy and Tam were declared the winners after earning $966,000 on the house, plus the added $100,000, bringing their grand prize to $1,066,000. Jimmy and Tam were another success story and happy ending for The Block. Everything seemed to be nirvana for all involved, but something more sinister lurked beneath the surface. Weeks after the finale, Channel 9 was still waiting for the money from Fake. After realizing the money was never in the account, they knew something was amiss. They went looking for her to collect the money she owed for the home, but the only thing they found on Fake was a trail of debt through multiple continents. This took Fake's mysterious persona to a whole new level. Jimmy and Tam were stumped. They even considered Fake a friend after she bought their house. The couple had her over to celebrate as they watched the grand finale when it aired on TV. Tam recalls sharing wine and a moment with Fake when they cried together after the winner was revealed. Fake even had the Wilkins fooled. When Channel 9 eventually found a way to contact her, Fake claimed she was the owner of the house and it was already paid by her. Fake maintained her fight until February 18th, a few days after she publicly renounced ownership of the house. Then she left Australia. She did not reappear until May, and she was almost unrecognizable with long blonde extensions. She assumed a new identity with a name change to match her new look. She now goes by Abigail Fuchs. So where was she? The only place you can take the name International Con Women to a whole new level, a tropical island near Portugal. Fake escaped to the island of Madeira and took up an entirely new life. Madeira is a stunning island at the top of a gigantic shield volcano with impeccable views. It's a popular year-round resort with its selection of cultural activities, from great food and wine and rich historical land wherever you look. Madeira is beyond just a tourist destination, but a whole rich experience. With unbeatable weather of 60 to 75 degrees year-round, it's understandable why someone would want to flee to this location. Fake has created an entirely new life for herself while living on the island. She made herself comfortable by picking up hobbies such as deep-sea diving nearly every day. While setting her life up in Madeira, Fake even found the time for dating. After a night of swiping on Tinder, Fake came across Steve Silva, a crypto trader. The two hit it off and they started dating. Silva was charmed by the woman who claimed to work for Apple and the United Nations. She bragged about being a CEO and admitted to Silva that he was the first man she dated that made more money than her. Silva noticed something was somewhat off with her, but forced down the gut feeling. The two dated for a brief period before the relationship ended. Unfortunately, Silva had loaned her a diving watch that she never returned. Fake told Silva that she was forced into isolation because her landlord tested positive for COVID-19. Fake told Silva she would go to the hospital for a test, but he had a feeling she wasn't telling the truth. Believing his suspicion, Silva went to the hospital and waited for Fake to show up for hours, but she never did. While he waited, he killed time by looking up the rental property where Fake was staying. He found a review for the place with a familiar picture of Fake's face, but he didn't recognize the name. When he dug deeper, he discovered a disturbing truth lurking just beneath the surface of Fake's web of lies. The block was not the first scam Silva dug up. Fake was quite familiar with using fake bank deposits to scam individuals. When she was consistently accused of sending counterfeit statements in her past, she used the same tactic for her Block scam. Fake duped the Block's executive producer, Julian Kress, by sending screenshots of the bank account registered with ANZ, the Australian and New Zealand banking group. She used the screenshots as proof that she paid the $426,500 deposit and the final settlement of $4,072,951 for the home. After the money never arrived, Fake blamed an unnamed lawyer, claiming she didn't have sufficient time to finish the deal. But her scamming didn't stop with the show. Well, in Madeira, Fake scammed her landlord with the same trick. The lies and deceit go so far that one could question if the landlord ever even had COVID. When Australian media sources exposed Fake's scandal with the Block, past came back to haunt her. An ex-boyfriend accused her of stealing £50,000 from him after receiving a payment slip stating she sent him the money. The money never arrived, and after further analysis, an independent source proved the bank statement was fake. A second accuser stepped forward, a Hungarian graphic designer who claimed Fake sent another fake ANZ statement to him for $1,000, which he never received. With all the information he had on his former girlfriend, Silva had only one thing on his mind. He had to get his watch back. Enraged by all the dirt he found on his ex, Silva confronted Fake through WhatsApp, only to be blocked after warning her she was in deep trouble. Realizing he was out of options, Silva went to the police and reported his GoPro and diving watch stolen. When the police arrived at Fake's door, Fake texted her landlord telling him everything Silva said was a lie. But the only message she received back was, "Scammer." To this day, Fake maintains innocence. In a video she posted to her Instagram, Fake provided her side of the story. She denied all allegations of scamming the Block's producers and her landlord. She denied fleeing Australia to avoid her scandal. She even denied having criminal investigations or any form of legal action against her. She claims that she and Silva never dated, saying he was never her boyfriend and couldn't take no for an answer. She blamed the show about the house, stating she received all the formalities too late. By the time the settlement came around, she didn't have enough time to get all her money together. Fake doesn't believe she fled anything. She says she left Australia to work out her next steps, which sounds like fleeing to us. Today, Fake still goes by Abigail Fuchs and continues her life in Madeira, avoiding her alleged crimes. Hopefully, her new life leaves her scamming past behind her. This is what happens when female psychopaths start scamming. Let's get right into it. Number 4. City girls behind city bars. Before City Girls, singer JT was known as Jatavia Johnson, a Miami girl who came from nothing. Hailing from a bad neighborhood, JT was among the youngest of 16 brothers and sisters. After she reached 7th grade, JT was put out on her own, sometimes staying with an aunt and other times crashing at friends' houses. JT had various day jobs from Whole Foods to Burger King, always working, but still struggling to make ends meet. Getting fed up with the life she had, JT used a handful of stolen credit card numbers to buy clothes and various gift cards she felt she deserved. JT showed off this time of her life in photos she posted on her social media. Gifts for her niece, a digital camera for a vacation, makeup artists for night outs with the girls. She was eventually arrested in June of 2017 at a Nordstrom after buying a pair of shoes. Shortly after her arrest, JT and the other half of City Girls, Young Miami, were discovered by hip-hop label Quality Control. And by Christmas, City Girls had released their first official single, a song we're not going to repeat. We're pretty sure this song isn't going to challenge Mariah Carey for most played song at Christmas anytime soon. Also released around the same time was Where the Bag At, a song about demanding money where JT repeats deeply poetic lines describing that she needs someone, quote, who gonna swipe them visas. This likely didn't help her case. JT pled guilty to aggravated identity theft and was sentenced to 24 months in federal prison. Her lawyer provided a schedule of upcoming City Girl shows leading up to a major appearance at the BET Awards in June of that year, so the judge agreed to push back JT's surrender date. Then, a week before she was set to go in, JT's lawyer requested another delay on account of a recent cosign with Canada's favorite son, Drake, leaning into the fact that JT was a rising superstar in the hip-hop industry. The requested extension wasn't fully granted, but JT was permitted to perform at the award show and finish her verse for Drake. After completing her commitments, JT honored her sentence and showed up to serve her time. JT began her prison term in July 2018 and was set to be released on March 1, 2020. In the meantime, City Girls continued to release singles and tracks with the other half of the group, Young Miami, doing everything she could to promote their music. In an attempt to get an early release, JT argued her good behavior for over a year should qualify her, leaving about 8.5 months of her sentence remaining. While the request was denied, JT was transferred to a halfway house 5 months before her scheduled release, allowing her to continue her career. Since her incarceration and release, JT has amassed a net worth of $1.5 million. That net worth mostly comes from the group's high appearance fees. They charge $40,000 for TV appearances and $15,000 for nightclub appearances. Looks like she found a new way to rip people off. Number 3, her mantra was to steal. Amanda Knorr, 35, was one of 3 people charged over a green energy scheme that defrauded over 300 investors. Knorr and her college boyfriend, Troy Ragg, founded MantraCore. Knorr's company, Mantra, focused on green community development, socially responsible investing, distressed real estate fund management, mortgage banking, renewable energy, music and entertainment, and philanthropy. So pretty much everything. The couple received more than $54 million from hundreds of investors within 4 years based on promises of technology that would turn trash into fuel and carbon-negative housing developments, neither of which were ever fully developed. MantraCore is known as the largest green energy scam the U.S. has ever seen. Many victims lost their entire life savings. Mantra was a Ponzi scheme in which new investor money was used to pay earnings to prior investors, often without any actual product being sold. Mantra's pitch was centered primarily around a venture to produce biochar and a green real estate development in Tennessee. Biochar is a charcoal-like substance made by burning organic material in a process called pyrolysis. Biochar was supposed to take waste like used tires and household garbage and convert it into an energy source and a fertilizer. By spreading this stuff all over your field, it could pull toxins out of the atmosphere. Knorr and Ragg were both honored by former President Bill Clinton, a real pillar of morality himself, during a 2009 ceremony for the Clinton Global Initiative for their plans to develop biochar technology that they said would sequester carbon dioxide and reduce emissions in developing countries. Knorr and Ragg lied to investors, along with Colorado wealth advisor Wade McKelvey. McKelvey ran get-rich-quick seminars to pitch their biochar technology and a carbon-negative housing development in Tennessee. Through his Speed of Wealth seminars, one featuring John Elway, McKelvey overstated claims that Mantra had already made millions of dollars and promised investment returns as high as 484%. McLevy specifically targeted elderly investors and taught them how to liquidate all their assets, such as mutual funds and 401k plans, then told them to take out as many loans as possible and invest it all in Mantra. Many of them did. However, Mantra's environmental initiatives hadn't been profitable. Biochar is very expensive to produce, and Mantra only had one plant that was just starting out, not the claimed 25. The housing development wasn't anything more than vacant lots resold at a loss, and the early returns paid to investors had been funded almost exclusively from new investments. So where did all these retirees' life savings go? Ragg claims he didn't spend lavishly, despite the influx of millions to their company, merely living in a 1,200 square foot home, and said there was no Lamborghini parked out front. He was, however, driving around in a Mercedes SLK 350 with a Mantra vanity license plate. Granted, it's not an elite luxury vehicle, but it's not a Honda Civic either. Along with funding their lifestyles, there was the creation of Mantra Records, a record label that invested money in a rapper called Ice Block. Mantra Records funded a music video for Ice Block that ridiculously featured Ragg and Noor. A lawsuit was able to recover about $6 million for victims of the scheme. Another $800,000 was placed in a receivership but has yet to be paid out. Of the $54 million invested in Mantra, $17 million have been paid out to early investors. But when the Securities Exchange Commission shut Mantra down, only $790,000 remained from the other $37 million. Noor and Ragg both pled guilty after being charged. While out on bail, waiting for his sentence, Ragg hatched another scheme where he solicited an investment in an online video dating service that was about to be purchased by a well-known entrepreneur. Of course, there was no deal, and the victim lost her entire investment. Troy Ragg was deemed a continued threat to the public and received a harsher sentence of 22 years in prison and $54 million restitution. Wade McKelvey was sentenced to 18 years in prison, 5 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay $37 million restitution. Amanda Noor was sentenced in Philadelphia federal court to only 30 months in federal prison and ordered to pay $37 million restitution. Maybe these three should invest in a little morality. Number 2. Give me your tax returns. Tanya M. Fox spent $4 million on a BMW 7 Series, an Infiniti M35, a Chrysler Crossfire, Volkswagen Beetle, and a Maserati, 2 cosmetic surgeries, and she opened a restaurant in Orlando, Florida. But Fox didn't earn her $4 million the old-fashioned way our fathers and grandfathers did, by playing the state lottery. She actually opened bank accounts in the name of fake tax prep businesses to file for fraudulent returns, then used other people to withdraw those returns. Fox filed over 3,590 false tax returns on behalf of 3,023 different victims. Fox used social security numbers, dates of birth, and names of patients, most of whom were teenagers, at the health department to file the returns and obtain nearly $4.1 million. 2 health department employees, Shantarisha Smith and Gerald Williams, and Williams' brother Delray Duncan, were arrested, admitting that they were paid roughly $45,000 to steal patients' information. The investigation started when sheriffs were searching a house and discovered a handwritten list with about 150 names, dates of birth, and social security numbers. During her trial, Fox was deemed the mastermind behind the scheme, given the more severe punishment of 20 years for aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy, as well as theft of government property. While the sentence was viewed by some as harsh, the judge brought up the aggravating factor of bribing 3 members of the health department to get her hands on the identities. Further, the majority of the stolen identities belonged to teenagers who will be unaware that their identities had been stolen and the problems that will create until they try to buy a house or a car in the future. All of Fox's assets were seized in order to pay restitution. Her co-conspirator, Gerald Williams, received 4.5 years, Delray Duncan got 3.5, and Shantarika Smith was sentenced to 5 years. Number 1. Queen Tax Fraud. Rashia Wilson was the self-proclaimed queen of IRS tax fraud. Apparently, tax fraud has a monarchy. She posted a message on Facebook in all capital letters for emphasis, claiming that she's a millionaire. For the record, so if we had thought the police indicting her would be easy, it wouldn't be. Honestly, we thought it would have been easy. Wilson promised us that we need more than, quote, black and white to hold her down. That was the message to the rat who went and told on her, although her meaning still seems a bit vague. Wilson's post goes on in disbelief about the police's possible indictment plans, as if the First Lady, so wait, now she's not a queen? Didn't have the Tampa Bay Police Department under her spell. Wait, she's a witch now? Her Majesty reminded us that at the moment she ran Tampa, so she wouldn't have to do any time. But Wilson obviously meant no time other than the 21 years she had gotten for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and being a felon, queen, witch, in possession of a firearm. From April 2009 to September 2012, Queen and First Lady Horatia Wilson and her co-conspirator Maurice J. Larry ran a scheme to defraud the Internal Revenue Service by fraudulently obtaining tax refunds. They received U.S. Treasury checks and prepaid debit cards that were loaded with funds derived from filing false income tax returns in other people's names. Wilson and Larry filed these tax returns from various locations, including Wilson's own home and various hotels throughout Tampa. Wilson and Larry then used these refunds to make hundreds of thousands of dollars in retail purchases, to buy money orders, and to withdraw cash. During the unpredicted investigation, agents searched Wilson's house and Larry's storage unit, where they discovered thousands of names and social security numbers. Agents also found high-end accessories, jewelry, and a firearm in Wilson's home. Further additional reloadable debit cards loaded with fraudulent tax refunds were found in both locations. Wilson, who often referred to herself as the First Lady and Queen of Tax Fraud, title she chose for herself, spent $30,000 on her daughter's first birthday party and had purchased a new Audi for $90,000. The IRS estimated that the actual loss from Wilson and Larry's scheme was $2,240,096.39, though the royal couple's potential theft was in excess of $11 million. At her trial, Wilson's defense brought in a psychologist who explained that she suffers from bipolar disorder that was first diagnosed from a young age, and that the absurd bragging is consistent with her disorder. Wilson had a rough upbringing, struggled in school, and eventually dropped out. However, the judge couldn't ignore the fact that Wilson stole over $3 million from the government. An unfortunate upbringing with a mental disorder didn't give her a pass. The judge sentenced Horatia Wilson to 21 years in federal prison for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and being a felon in possession of a firearm, as well as the forfeiture of $2,240,096.39, which constitutes the proceeds traceable to the offense. This was quite an unusually hefty sentence for the amount of money she had stolen. In fact, a petition was set up on change.org calling for a lesser sentence for her. It probably didn't help her case that she chose to scam the government and that she talked trash while doing it. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section whether or not you think the judge gave Horatia too hefty of a sentence or not.